This is Abundantly Clear, a Malorie Nicole podcast designed to help you further understand the concept of abundance and put it into practice to build the business and life of your dreams. We'll be breaking barriers of conditioned belief, the standard rules of marketing, and empowering you to achieve real success, allowing you to make a greater impact and live a fulfilled, purpose-driven life with ease. Welcome to the conversation, the stories, the science, and the synergy of living life abundantly clear. Now, on to today's episode.
Welcome to this week's episode of Abundantly Clear. This week, I'm going to be talking solo about a topic that I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that might want to pay attention to what I'm going to be sharing this week, and that is perfectionism. Perfectionism is a big one that we all see quite often in the entrepreneurial world, and it's something that creates huge blocks and stress in business. So I'm going to share some pieces about where perfectionism came from and just a tip on how to shift out of it for you today on this episode. So if you find yourself falling into any of the categories that I'm about to share with you, or maybe you know somebody or work with somebody or have a partnership with somebody that you might see these patterns come up with, I encourage you to listen, because there might be something that you hear that you want to also share with someone that you know that could help them. So how do we know when perfectionism is showing up in our business? I'm going to share a couple examples to kind of lay this out so that you can identify if this is something maybe you struggle with. And if you do, don't worry, because this can be shifted really quickly if you give yourself the opportunity to really do the work to do it. So thinking in terms of extremes, all or nothing type of behaviors. If one thing happens, it might send this person into a bit of a spiral. We're either going to win or we're going to lose. And if something goes wrong, we're going to lose. That's a sign of perfectionism. Being terrified of feeling or looking like a failure is another one. Having trouble completing tasks because there's always a story in the back of this person's head that they should improve it, so it doesn't really give a whole lot of room to ever finish it. Not ever being happy with how far they've come, because there's always something and some level further that they're trying to get to that they can't seem to reach. Toxic relationships with money, usually operating from a scarcity mindset. And I'm just going to add a note in here real quick. I am in the process of creating a money mindset course per request from a lot of people that have been asking for help in that area. So stay tuned for more info on that in the coming months. I'm in the recording phase right now. It should be out soon enough. One of the last things is confidence relying on quantifying exactly how much you've accomplished. So when business isn't at its highest points, neither is the person. And that might seem counterintuitive, because when our business is going our best, that's when we feel our best, right? But there's a piece of this that we're missing a little bit, and it's the part that we're actually projecting out into when these shifts happen. So when the business isn't going super amazing, the person might start to question if they really have what it takes to shift, and they might fall into a total scarcity mindset of just feeling like a failure because they're not continuing to grow at the pace that they had hoped for. The interesting part about perfectionism is that it has a couple different roots. And you hear things like that it's a blanket for fear, that it's a blanket for insecurity, or that it's a blanket for shame. And you might have even heard me say these things before myself. But perfectionism can have multiple layers to it, and it doesn't always come from the same story experience, or belief. A big thing that I do know to be true about this pattern is that, like most other patterns, it's always just an illusion. 100% of the time, it's connected to a false story or how someone has experienced something that's been created that isn't really serving them. And if you're a first-time listener, just to note, when I share things like came from a place, what I mean is the root or the behavior of where the pattern showed up, because everything that we do and all the actions we take are always backed by the beliefs that are going on in our heads. So specifically, the root of perfectionism isn't always the same for everyone that experiences it. Kind of like the concept that there's a lot of the same types of trees on the planet that all look similar. They share the same qualities. Pines all look like pine trees. Oaks all look like oak trees. But they came from different seeds, even though they look similar. Perfectionism is the same thing. And there's actually two polar opposite stories that I see quite often with the people that I work with and the people that I help in where perfectionism comes from. And I'm going to share with you kind of what the polarity is with these two things. One area of perfectionism that I see quite often is that it shows up with people that grew up in pretty chaotic households, because that pattern actually allowed them to create safety amongst chaos. So it gave them a sense of control in a very uncontrolled environment. So if there were parents that were fighting a lot, or, an unstable mother or father, if you lived in more of a nuclear household, and if you didn't, doesn't really matter. If there was a lot of unstable situations in the household, sometimes what the child will do and the beliefs that will get created from the experiences is they will step into a sense of perfection, and they'll create that perfection is their way to have control of what's going on. And they end up taking the story with them, this chaotic household story with them. And a lot of times it ends up running and creating blocks in their business and even in their relationships in their life. This one kind of affects all areas. But the opposite is actually completely true as well. There are people that I've worked with, people, that I've helped through the same pattern, that didn't grow up in chaotic households at all. They grew up in really, really stable environments. Yet that story was still adapted from some type of experience, and then they ended up carrying that pattern with them forever. But here's what we get to remember, is just because it happened, whether it be the perfect family that someone grew up in the perfect family household that someone grew up in, or the unstable, chaotic environment, just because it happened doesn't make those experiences permanent. Our lens is ever evolving. And here's a simple key in how to overcome this. The more we become observers of our stories, we get to decide which ones work for us and which ones we want to rewrite. And when we rewrite those stories, we show up to our business completely and utterly different. Although marketing may teach you that you can only double your profit by spending more money on marketing, I know and see different every single day from firsthand witnessing people rewriting their own stories and seeing the outcomes. So to all the perfectionists listening to this episode that know these patterns and know that you're struggling with it, know that that is just something that can shift like a switch. And the more you understand your own root, And maybe it's neither of the categories that I explained, because there's other places where this comes from too. The more you understand the root of where it came from, the more you understand why you experienced things the way that you did, then you get to open up your platform to recreate your lens and how you look at things now. So when you find moments that you're getting stuck in, that you feel like that part of you might be creeping in, give yourself the chance to ask yourself this very simple question. What are 2 other options of how I could be looking at the potential outcomes of this situation? I will share that one more time. What are 2 other options of how I could be looking at the potential outcomes of this situation? Because usually the perfectionist pattern blocks out most ability to see outside of a one-lane avenue. So if you give yourself the opportunity to ask the very simple question, you might be surprised at what pattern interrupts you create for yourself by allowing yourself to think outside of the normal boxes that are your default, and giving yourself the opportunity to create some new stories as you move forward in your day and in your business. As always, listeners, I hope you found value in this episode and know these things can change in the blink of an eye. If you need help, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, I will see you next week on the Abundantly Clear podcast.
Thanks for listening. As you put these concepts and practices into action, you'll begin to see the benefits of living an abundantly clear life. To connect with Malorie and other high performers, join the Abundantly Clear Entrepreneurs community on Facebook or visit malorie-nicole.com.